Is risen. This is Father Joe Cisetti. Thank you for joining me once again. A while back, we looked at a couple of works of art by the Italian artist Caravaggio. I'd like today to look at a piece of Dutch art. This artist's name is Dirk van Barbuen. He has a painting that's in the Nelson Atkins Museum of Art here in Kansas City. It's The Crowning of Thorns. It's a very moving painting. You look at that painting and it makes you just want to take out your rosary and start to pray the third sorrowful mystery, the crowning of thorns. So let's take a look at the painting. We see Jesus suffering there. We see two men imposing the crown of thorns on him, and we see three men to the left. First of all, we see the influence of Caravaggio here. This is maybe a decade or two after Caravaggio, and Van Barbuen studied in Rome, so we clearly see that influence there. There is this interplay of light and darkness expressed in those Italian words, chiaroscuro, light and darkness, and we see the light coming in from the left. We see it reflecting on the body of Jesus off the headband of one of the torturers, and you see it reflected off the armor of that soldier whose face we just barely see. If you look closely, obviously he has a nose, he has a mustache. That's all you really see in it. Now, these men are dressed in more contemporary clothing for that time, whereas Jesus is depicted in the clothing that we think of in terms of biblical times. So think about how that would be today. Perhaps that soldier would be wearing some camouflage fatigues if we wanted to do a modern rendering of it. And so we see Jesus there in anguish. We see Jesus there in great suffering. And we know that suffering is going to continue. We see the two men putting the crown of thorns on him. The one to the right seems to be smiling as he's doing it. He looks very cruel. The older man that we see to the left, you look at him, his eyes seem very intent on what he's doing. Is he being precise or is he being cruel? Don't quite know for sure. But if you look at his mouth, you start to see there seems to be just a little bit of a smile there. It seems like he's enjoying what he's doing. So it's one thing when we suffer, and sometimes, we end up causing suffering for other people, hopefully unintentionally. But these people, these two men, are not only causing suffering, they seem to be enjoying it. Now, it says in the gospel that once Jesus was crowned with thorns, that he was mocked. We see the reed in his hand there, and very soon, perhaps that soldier we see to the left will start to strike him or slap him. But right now, that young man with a feather in his hat, and that old man who just seems to be standing there rather statuesque, are all to the left, and they are indifferent. They are indifferent to the sufferings of Jesus, to what he's going through there. So we see the suffering, we see those causing the suffering and taking delight in it, but then we see those who are indifferent to suffering. And so perhaps there's a lesson in all that to us, to learn to see the suffering Christ in others. And as I just mentioned, that if we do cause suffering, and we all do at one time or another, but hopefully not do it intentionally, and certainly not to enjoy it, but then to avoid hardness of heart, to avoid indifference. Think of some of the parables of Jesus. Think about the Good Samaritan. The priest and the Levite did not show compassion. They were indifferent, or at least uncaring to the suffering of the man who fell among thieves. Think about the rich man and Lazarus. He is indifferent to the sufferings of Lazarus. Indifference can be a type of heart disease. And by reflecting on God's love, particularly by reflecting on the passion of Jesus, Hopefully that's something that can open up our hearts to see the suffering Christ in others. When we meditate particularly on the sorrowful mysteries, to a large extent, we're meditating on mysteries 2 through 5 on someone who is being tortured, someone who's being tortured to death. And reflecting on those should lead us, hopefully, at least to pray for people who are suffering today, for people who are being tortured today, people who are being truly tortured. And it happens very much in our world today, and we don't like to think about it. But hopefully this will lead us at least to pray for them. Hopefully we can learn to see the suffering Christ in others. And hopefully we can respond with our prayers and even with our actions, that we might be cured of that heart disease that we call indifference. Now, in the meantime, we continue to move forward with lives of intentional faith, and we rejoice in hope, in the words of St. Paul. And as St. Paul goes on to tell us, we endure in affliction and we persevere in prayer.